there are not a lot of things that I find more exciting than people creating stuff on their own without rules somewhere, and then like something crazy cool happens with that. Like that's always fascinated me. This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. My name is Malcolm Owen-flood, and today I am interviewing my co-host, Benedikt Hain, who is a full-time mix engineer, a musician, a father and husband, and the founder of this platform and podcast, the Self-Recording Band. Welcome.
Hi, Malk. How are you?
I'm great, man. I'm super good. Excited to be interviewing you.
Cool.
So this is like kind of, I guess, part 3 of our podcast, and we're letting our whoever's listening get to know us and what we do. And they probably know you a little more than they know me, just because you've been online and doing this for a while. But this is kind of the introduction to the podcast. So we want to get your story, and I want to get your story too, because even though we've been we've known each other for a while, I don't really know how you got into all of this. So I think just bring it back right to the start. Like, when did you become even a musician? Like, when did music really enter your life?
Sure. Yeah, awesome to like. I actually enjoy. I think I'm enjoying sharing my story, because I never really get to do that. So, and I have to think about it for a bit myself. The thing is, I didn't have a plan for all of this, and it happened very organically. So if I think back, I think I got into music or being a musician when I was like, I don't know, the kind of music that I'm doing right now, probably when I was like 12 or 13, because music has always been a part of my life. I've started playing the piano with like 5 or 6 years, when I was 5 years old, I think. And my dad had a small recording studio as well for a couple of years, so I kind of, music was always around. But I, like, when I got to, like, when I was, like 12, 13, 14 years old, I stopped playing the piano for a couple of years, because I just lost interest in it. But then I discovered what I do now, the type of music that I do now, because then I found some friends who I used to go skateboarding with, and then we listened to punk rock, and we listened to all those bands that I fell in love with, and I discovered this whole punk rock, hardcore, alternative music scene. And then we formed a band, and I taught myself how to play the guitar, and then we sort of taught each other how to play our instruments. Nobody could really, I mean, I had a basic understanding of music theory, and I could like teach it myself pretty well. But all the other guys, but basically all of us, we never played the guitar, drums, or anything. We just learned our instruments while starting our first band. And then this band actually is still together. We never really broke up. Like, we haven't been that active the past couple of years, but we're still a band. It's been more than like, I don't know, 16 years or something.
I was just gonna ask how long that's amazing.
Yeah. It's still there, the band. And this band, like from this first attempt at playing music, and without knowing our instruments, like, I don't know, like maybe 10 years later or so, we were touring all over Europe, and we had a record deal and all that stuff. And it was always that band. There was never another band or whatever. It was always the same people. And later I played in some other bands as well, but this is the thing that started it all, and it's still there. And it's because of this band that I learned how to record, and that I got into this whole music thing. And the recording thing happened out of necessity, because we wanted to record ourselves back then, obviously, and we didn't have any money. We were students. And I was always interested in the technical stuff as well. I have to admit that it always, like, I always wanted to try that. And yeah, and then I think we wanted to make a demo, and we had a crappy old PC and a version of Mixcraft. I don't know. Do you know the software Mixcraft?
I am familiar with what it is, but I didn't have to come up on that.
Yeah, I think it was the only It was back then. It was what Reaper is now for many people, because they had a trial period and you could like evaluate forever. Like if the trial period was over, you could just hit evaluate again, and then the trial period started over again. So it's totally stupid, but it worked that way. So we didn't pay for that software actually, and we didn't steal it anyway. We just started the trial period over and over again. And
was this at you said your dad had a little studio at your house?
Yeah, but this was when I was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 years old, and then when I went to school, he quit. I remember that studio actually, and I remember that there was always some music stuff and tech stuff around our house, but he quit when it was like, I don't know, a very small child. So no, that had nothing to do with my dad's studio. Yeah. We just found this software. We just Googled it, I think, and we downloaded the first recording software that we found, and then it was free, or free, quote unquote. And then we plugged our active, like a power mixer that was in our rehearsal room. Yeah. Like it had a line out, and we plugged that line out into the line in of the PC without any interface or something, just the audio in of the PC sound card.
Yeah, like I remember there's like 3 plugs. There's one for like headphones and one for a mic in. Yeah. It's like probably an 1/8" adapter or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And at the time I didn't even know the difference between a mic in or a line in or whatever. It just was audio input, and the other thing had an audio output, so I connected the output to the input, and then I had sound inside the computer. So and then we recorded and we mixed it all on this mixer and then sent the output to the computer. I think it was mono even. I don't even know, but I think it was in mono. And I remember hitting play for the first time and thinking like, this is the coolest thing ever, because it sounded, to me, it sounded like a professional recording. And that was because there was not too much noise, or it didn't sound like, what did we have back then to record stuff? I mean, we didn't have phones or smartphones. We had like, the only option would be you had a tape deck or whatever with a built-in microphone or something like that. That you could use something like that, and that had always had noise and all sorts of things. And this recording was the first recording without that loud noise floor. So I thought, yeah, that's a quality recording, you know? Yeah, exactly. It was so cool. And then, and we did that. And we then, I just kept going and kept improving, and I really fell in love with that whole process. And I made a couple of, like, looking back now, I made a couple of mistakes, but at the same time, it's like, if I would have been just a musician wanting to record his own band, I would have made everything wrong, basically, because I tried to do everything myself. I was not looking for advice or for help. I just tried to figure it out on my own. I didn't even use like mixing engineers or whatever. I tried to mix our records myself, and it always sounded crappy. But at the same time, I somehow knew that this would probably be what I will be doing for the rest of my life. And then so from that perspective, it was very cool, because I just put in the hours and got better and better. But I could have done it much faster, and I could have served my band better if I just hired somebody to finish it off, and if I Right.
But at the same time, you knew, well, maybe you didn't know, but you kind of had the inkling in your head that you might want to end up doing this. So was it like an instant thing, or did it kind of happen over time that you figured out that you wanted to do this professionally? You wanted to mix, or I guess originally even just record and produce, but that you wanted to have a studio and end up on that side of the glass, so to speak.
I never really wanted it at the time or planned it. I thought I think it was in the back of my head somewhere. Like I already knew that I had the passion for it and that I would love to do this, but I just think I thought it was unrealistic. I didn't think it was an actual job, or it was too risky. And I mean, I've always taken risks, and I sucked in school, you know, because I always did the bare minimum. If it wasn't stuff that I chose myself, if it was stuff that somebody made me do, I had always a hard time doing that. It's just, I don't know, it's always been that way. I've never been the person who just does things because somebody says I should do things. I always chose myself. I mean,
Very punk rock.
Yeah, I mean, I have, it's not that I don't have work ethic or whatever. If I'm interested in a thing, if I'm passionate about a thing, I can go forever and I'm motivated and I'm disciplined and all that. But if it's something somebody makes me do and I have no personal interest in it gets really difficult. And it was difficult for me as a when I was younger because like, yeah, I mean, life is harder if you are like that, you know? So, so I didn't think that this was a real job, but at the same time, I had no other option because I sucked at school and I didn't want to do anything else. So what do, you know? And then, what I did then was I tried to go to college, but I chose, I don't know the English word for that. Like if you're not like physically there, but you do it over
online?
Yeah, it wasn't really online back then. They would send you like books and paper and stuff, and then you would study, and then you would once every quarter or something, you would have to go there and write a test or something.
Oh,
and then,
okay.
So it's a real it's the same thing as if you would just go to college, but you can do it from home. So I searched for something like that because I wanted to do music and audio. I didn't want to leave my band, and we still rehearsed every week and all that. This was just my life, and I didn't want to give that up. So I was basically searching for an easy way to do something that my parents think is right, and B, do something that might be a safe option for me in the future. And so I was looking around for stuff like that, and then I found this college, and then I started there. And I was there for 3 semesters, which is 1.5 years. And then I never opened a single package that they sent me. So like all this paper, all the book and everything, like the stuff, they sent it to me and it just went in a corner of the room and I never opened it for 1.5 years. And then I was like, I have to quit. This doesn't make any sense. I'm just there because like, I don't even know why. All I want to do is music. I will never pass any test or whatever. And like, so I quit that. I tried it a second time. This time I was physically there. I was studying something called media technology, which has at least an audio part. And I did better that time, but after 1.5 years again, I had to either learn to pass all the math tests and what they had in the engineering part. Like it's really complicated stuff, the science part of it. Mm-hmm. And I had to either learn and pass those exams and stop the studio and the music for a while, or I just quit that also and go all in on the music thing. And that was when I decided, okay, no more studying for me, no more college. I'll drop out a second time, but I never try again, and I just go audio, you know.
Right. So it sounds like you kind of realized by trying these other things that you didn't want to do those things, right?
Yeah. But it took a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I can relate to that.
Yeah, I was very insecure, really, because I could have started right away, but I was unsure if that was going to work out, and it took me like I don't know 3, 4, 5 years to figure that out, and then.
Right, and I guess through all of this, you're still recording.
All the time. I did nothing else. I had a little. At first, I did it in our practice room. Our other band started like coming to me and asking me to record their demos, and I recorded my own projects, my own band. I was practicing a lot. I was, I didn't even realize, but it was actually a small business back then. I moved out from home when I was like 19, I think. I was still in school back then, but I moved out from home, but it was already a small business actually, without me even noticing it. And by the time I tried to study a second time, go to college a second time, then I realized, man, I don't even need this college thing because I'm already making money. I could probably live off of that. And now it's the time to finally take it serious.
Right. So was that the transition point when you went from, because at least for me, and I think for a lot of people that are getting into pro audio, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this aren't even realizing this is going to happen to them. And it might not happen to them. But so in my case, I started being in a band, started recording under the necessity to record, like have recordings for my band, but I still wanted to be a rock star and not a recording engineer at that point, right? And I'm wondering if this was the switch point, where it went from I want to be like, I want my band to blow up and, tour the world, to I want my studio to be like this awesome place and I just want to be the best like producer or mix engineer or engineer or whatever at that point of your life your goal was. But like, was that where that kind of like where recording became your focus over being a musician?
Absolutely. Before that, the band was number one for sure, because I didn't even realize I had this job. And but after that, it really switched. Also, what happened then was my wife and I got married in 2013, and that was the year I quit the second attempt of studying. Right. And like we were thinking about starting a family someday, and I was realizing I have nothing really. Like I have no job. I didn't, other than high school. I don't have anything like. But I'm pretty decent at audio and people are hiring me. So my only chance really is to take this seriously. And it's been my passion anyway for years. So yeah, that was the moment when I realized I am an engineer now. And that's my job. That's my full-time profession. That's the number one priority after family stuff and health stuff. And that was absolutely the point. And what's interesting about what you just said there is, I think you made the wiser decisions for your band back then because you had a more focus on your band. You saw yourself as a musician more, and I saw myself, even without knowing, I think I saw myself more as the guy who wanted to figure the tech stuff out and the engineer. So you hired professional engineers to make your records sound great, right? Even if you were doing it yourself, but you knew that it was but you knew that it would be the best thing for your band, and it worked out. And in my case, I kind of put my own personal goals before the band, and like when I look back now, from the perspective of my band, this was the wrong decision. I mean, I learned a ton, I learned a lot, but our records would have sounded much better if I would have just practiced on my own, but let somebody else mix the actual record. I was able to make decent recordings, but I was not able to mix them properly. And I thought I was, but I wasn't really. And it would have been much wiser and better to just practice on my own. I could always have done this on the side, but have somebody else do the actual record.
That's so good, man. Because even like I didn't hire people every time my band did something, and but the more experienced I got, the more I realized that I could only specialize on really one thing, right? And maybe two, like I could be in the band and maybe record it, but like I couldn't do the band, record it, and be a professional mixer. And like started realizing that you had to have kind of a bit of a team mentality and figure out what you're going to invest your time in, because if you double down on one of those things, it's going to pay off. And in your case, you knew that you wanted to be on the engineering side and mixing side more than the band. So you chose to focus on that. Earlier in my time, I think I was more focusing on the band. And I think that's just like anybody listening to this should realize that they should choose something to focus on.
Absolutely.
Right. Just like hone in and don't worry about being the best at everything right now. Absolutely. And I think if you are, what this is all about is we with this podcast wanna like enable you to make recordings and records on your own for your band. And most of you won't end up being professional engineers because like, I don't even think that many of you would ever want that. I mean, I think the majority of our listeners probably are musicians wanting to record themselves. And if that's the case, if your goal is not to be the best engineer in the world, then I would absolutely focus on what you can really do and hire people for everything else. And the results will be much better and you'll have less stress and you can focus on what you are actually, a musician, and you can focus on making your band and records great. And that was really the mistake that I made back then. And at the same time, I have to say, though, that money was always an issue because we were all like students. We didn't have money. So I don't even know if I would have said, guys, like, I can't mix as well. We should hire somebody to mix this.
I'm not even sure if the band would have agreed. Maybe they would have said like we should totally do it on our own anyway because we don't have the money. So they are not mad at me for this decision. They weren't ever, and they were always happy with what we did. I only know that it would be much better if we did it the way.
Well,
but
hindsight's always 20/20.
Exactly. But at the same time, I think at the time it was a reasonable decision just for money reasons. But still, if I listen to that record, it still hurts a bit. And I always have this plan in the back of my head that I'll be remixing all these old records.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, because I just want them to. I just want to hear them properly one day. Like with a really good mix.
Well, that kind of leads us to the next step in your life. You started a studio. You decide that you're going to do this. So actually, we should start there. So you didn't have the studio you're sitting in right now.
No.
At that point, did you? Were
Nope.
you doing it out of your living situation?
Nope, never. I never did that.
Oh.
I was doing it from our rehearsal room, from our band's
okay.
rehearsal room first, and then I had another studio, which was also kind of a practice room that I shared with a couple of people. And in one corner of that practice room, it was actually 3 rooms. And in one corner of one of these rooms, I had my little setup there, but it was absolutely far from ideal. I didn't even have, like in this studio, quote unquote, I didn't even have like running water or anything. Like we had to go outside to pee, and we had no, like, there was no nothing. There was no heating. We had like this electric, radiators everywhere, like, and it was horrible. But it was very, very cheap, and I could experiment there. But when the projects got bigger and I got real bands that wanted to record with me, I always felt weird when they came to that place because it didn't look like a studio. It was an old building. It was like, as I said, like it's just not a professional facility,
Right.
And then in 2013. That was also the year when I decided I need to get something real, and then I moved into where I am now. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so now at this point of your life, you are you're a full-time mix engineer. You mix bands, and that's pretty much what you do. I mean, you've got so much other going on. You've got another podcast. You've got this whole educational platform. You're an extremely busy guy, family and all that. Yeah. But your main audio focus at this point is just mixing. So I'm curious about the transition to that, because I'm assuming when you started out, you're like, okay, I record my band. I now record other bands, and like you were saying that you should have maybe been hiring a mixer to begin with. So I'm curious how that transformation kind of happened for you.
Sure. I eventually got to the point where my mixes actually did sound good, or at least some people thought they do, and then they did. And then I thought I always enjoyed mixing a lot. That's why I always wanted to do it myself, because I always liked the process. I sucked at it first, but I always enjoyed it. So at first, I didn't know about like specializing and all that stuff. I thought a producer is a person who has a recording studio. He records and mixes and masters and does everything. Like I didn't know that there were specific like specialists for different tasks. And also, and so I didn't even know that was a thing. And that's been the case for a very long time. And then in 2017, I think, 17 or 18, by the end of 2017. I started learning more about the business side of things, and I still did everything. I didn't even think about specializing, not in genre and not in service, nothing. I did everything that would come through the door, basically. I always did, like, the only projects I didn't do were projects where I thought I couldn't do a decent job on, like some music that I have that I just don't know what to do with or whatever, but for the most part, I did everything. But then somebody, like, him, Brian, our business like master guru. Yeah. He's running, like, for those of you who don't know him, Brian is a mix engineer himself, and he was a producer before, and he's a very business savvy guy, but in a cool way. And he has a platform where he teaches audio professionals how to run better businesses and serve their clients better. And
we'll throw a link in the show notes for you guys on that.
Absolutely, I'll do that. And I discovered his platform, and I started to learn about the business side of things, and I started to discover a whole new world that I didn't know existed before. Like I didn't even care about anything like that. I always thought that the business side of things is kind of evil or gets in the way of the music and creativity and something. I mean, I was always in this punk rock hardcore world, like business guys are the enemy, like by default,
Mr.
Like,
Burns, Optimus Tower, yeah.
Absolutely. So no interest in business stuff at all. Like I felt bad whenever I made like a decent amount of money on a project or something, because like I had this weird relationship with money and business, really. And then I discovered this platform, discovered that not all business guys are evil by default. And I discovered that specializing could actually be a cool thing, and that I don't lose clients if I do that, but I looked at my clients, at my past projects. I saw that most of it was mixing at that point, without even realizing, but the majority of my better clients and bigger projects were mixing projects. And I thought, okay, that's actually pretty cool, because I have a family and I want to be flexible with my time. And the projects where bands are at my studio for weeks are always the most stressful periods. And as much as I like being in a room with a band, it's always stressful for the whole family and like unpredictable and all that. And when I can just mix on my own time, it will be much easier. And also I enjoyed mixing the most, always. It was always the part that's the most fun to me. And I thought if I just double down on that and try to get more mixing clients, that would be my ideal job that I want to have. And then, and then I did that. And what happened then the next year, and this was then the idea for where the idea for the self-recording band then came, was that I not only realized that most of my projects were mixing projects, but I realized that a majority of those projects were bands who recorded themselves, and that this got more and more. And I always spent a lot of time coaching those bands how to record or how to avoid mistakes. And I always sent back their files and made comments and said, hey, is there any chance you can re-record this? If you did this, it would be so much better. What do you think about this? Can we have a call? I have an idea. Because I wanted them to win, I wanted the record to be the best it can be. And I always, I discovered some mistakes or things that people do over and over again. Some things just repeated. And then I thought, instead of coaching everybody individually and spending that much time on every single project, I could just like put the information somewhere and just like send people to this page or platform or whatever. And at the same time, help others that are not my actual mixing clients, because it's already there. The content's already there. And turned out my clients liked it. It saved me a ton of time. And then that was the moment where I actually accepted and realized that I am now a mixing engineer and that I work with DIY bands a lot. And that became my job description, so to speak. So I never really, I think maybe I will someday, but I don't know if I ever work on like major label big projects or whatever. I've worked on some cool label projects, but it's all indie labels, hardcore punk, alternative stuff, and it doesn't get that big in this scene. Like there's not these. I just don't work with a lot of those. Possible
that's
mainstream
the nature
stuff.
of that scene for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and it took a while for me to accept that I will probably never be a superstar mixer, because that's just not the music that I work with every day. And then I actually enjoyed that thought that I'm a mixing engineer who does the music he loves and who can also help a lot of other people who are not even my clients, and that I work with DIY bands a lot. And that really, that was the moment when I thought like I found what I wanted to do. So yeah.
Oh, that's cool, and it makes sense to me as well. That I think once you made that decision, it was probably a little empowering, because like, okay, now I can just focus on making these DIY bands be the best they can be, and taking it just so much further than you might have before if you weren't like trying to like target that audience and educate and help them kind of like, with the recording process. It all makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And also one thing to mention is that with the stuff that I was mixing, or now even before that, I was starting to get some there were some small successes, some wins along the way, because what I realized then was that those DIY bands that I worked with, or my own band, even with the crappy mixes back then, we suddenly got signed to labels, and we got to play tours across Europe, and like this was still a DIY thing and still independent thing, and the budgets weren't huge, but still it reached people, it moved people, people bought the records, record labels got involved, and this was even cooler because I saw, well, it's totally possible to make a record in a practice room with cheap recording gear, have it mixed properly, and still get signed to a small but cool label who will pay for the manufacturing and who will handle the distribution of the records, and you can tour and everything. And that was actually a pretty cool realization that this is possible, and that you don't need to spend as much as you thought you would.
Yeah, that's even in my head, that's the dream breaking a band, is what I call it anyways. I don't know if that's the real term, but you're taking them from ground zero, DIY, they're making it in the jam space on their own in most cases, right? You're just there kind of as a guide. And then you're mixing it and it's working. It's this DIY thing that has been essentially packaged by you is going and getting them to the next level, be that a label or some big tour or really whatever, right? When I do an indie band and they get on the radio, I'm just that's what it was about. That's exactly what I wanted to have happen, right? So
yeah.
I love that. That's so cool. It's almost more impressive than doing a big major label thing, right? Because if you're in this big studio with this band that already has all the support, of course it's going to work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course, to some degree. I mean, it's still hard work, and some records still flop. But yeah, absolutely, building it from the ground up is a whole other challenge, and absolutely.
Right. So now, at that point, you've become a full-time mix engineer, and at a certain point, the self-recording band becomes an idea in your head. This whole educational platform.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I'm assuming, kind of came pretty shortly after you started getting interested in the business side of things, eh?
Yep. Absolutely. Because, yeah, sure. At first, it was just the fact that I was coaching people and wanted to make it simpler for myself. But at the same time, I then saw other guys educating other people, or other people educating other people, and I learned how that whole online business thing works, and that there's such a thing as semi-passive income. Mm-hmm. It's not really passive because it's always a lot of work. I don't know if there's a real passive income business. I don't know if that exists because you always have to put in the work first, but it's at least not trading hours for dollars. And
right.
I was very interested in that, of course, as well, because again, I have a family, and what happens if I get sick, or if I for whatever reason can't work for a couple of weeks or whatever. This was always something that was in my head, because I was never working with those really huge budgets, and I was making decent money, and I still am, and I can make a living off of it, but it's never I never feel completely safe, or at least not as much as I would like to, and I just wanted to find a way to have an additional income stream that's not totally dependent on my ability to be in the studio right now. So yeah, I thought, why not try and make it so valuable that people would be eventually one day be able to pay for whatever I can teach them and show them. And up until now, I didn't make a single euro or dollar with that. It's just, I've grown my audience. I wrote articles. I will still continue doing that. I mean, we do the podcast now. It's also completely free, so there will always be this free content. But there will eventually be other stuff like courses and stuff like that to monetize that. And not because I'm greedy now and all about the money, but just because I think that if people want to get real results, they have to invest in something. Because and I'm the same, if I consume a free YouTube video or a free podcast or whatever, it's cool, and I take that information. But if I pay for something, even if it's just a little, I feel the kind of a pressure to actually put it to action because I paid for it, and otherwise I would
You're
have wasted
invested.
that money. So I always felt like whenever I coached people and gave them advice, they would listen, of course. But in many cases, they said, yes, I understand, but they never really put it to action, or they just ignored it afterwards. And I think if people buy a piece of content or education or a course or whatever, and it has to be truly valuable and like in-depth and really something you cannot simply get for free.
Yeah.
But if they do that and it's awesome and it helps them, chances that they actually put it to action and be successful with it are much higher. So I thought this is just a win-win for everybody. I can serve people better. I can dedicate more time to this thing. I can help my mixing clients better. Because I can just give them access to whatever I have available. I can teach people who are not my clients, and I can support my family better, and people will get better results. So it's an all-around like win-win scenario for everybody. And yeah, I discovered that through taking online classes myself and really enjoying it. And I'm spending a whole lot of money on online courses and education every single year. It's a big part of my expenses, and I enjoy it. I as weird as it sounds, I enjoy spending money on things like that because every single time it's money well worth spending. And it's if I would just, you can find everything for free, but as I said, if I would just Google, or almost everything, but if I would just Google solutions all the time and consume free content, I would never have a real system and action plan. That's the first thing. And I would never feel the pressure to actually do it and apply what I learned. So Absolutely. I really enjoy doing that. And so I wanted to do that for others as well.
I think that's great. And I bet both of us could probably look at our careers in audio and even in a band, like pre-educating ourselves, actively educating ourselves, and post. Like I too also invest a lot into like just developing my skills, and that has caused such a change in my life.
So true.
Like both professionally and with the band, like just when you take that stuff seriously, it really takes you to the next level. And sometimes it's the only way to take you to the next level. And up until recently, this wasn't an option for anyone. Or at least maybe it wasn't really highly advertised. Like I didn't know about online courses for quite a while, right? And now, like when we learned, we had to learn on our own. Like you said, you were just in the jam space making mistakes, and people have to still do that, but not as much anymore, right? They can now kind of skip the queue and get ahead of the line by just like educating themselves with courses like that. And it's the best. It's like, what could be better?
Cool. If I would have known about stuff like that, there was some stuff like that back then, but I didn't know about it, and it wasn't that much. But I would have been so much faster. I would have gotten where I am now so much faster than I actually did. I don't regret anything. It was a cool journey. But when I think back a couple of years, like in 2000, I don't know, 2010, 9, 10, something like that, or 8. Like basically up to 2013, I didn't have internet connection in my studio, but I was there all the time. I didn't have a proper like smartphone. At some point I did, but the first couple of years, definitely not. And then the reception where I live in the middle of nowhere. Even if I have a smartphone here, it doesn't really help oftentimes. So I was sitting in my studio all day experimenting without an internet connection, and I had to figure stuff out on my own. If I would have been smarter, I would have went home, sat in front of the computer, Googled shit, or bought a course or whatever, because it was possible back then. But I decided to just stay in the studio as long as I can and figure stuff out. And it worked eventually, but it took a whole lot of time. And it would have been much, much, much faster if I would have just looked for advice and bought a course or whatever. Or if I just looked for a mentor or anything. Like I was just on my own and experimenting until something worked, So.
Yeah. Another thing people don't really realize about like investing in your skills and educating yourself is that it actually saves you a lot of time, like as well in all these places. Like if you learn how routing works inside of your DAW or simple stuff like that. And because when that stuff breaks, it takes you forever to like Google forums and look through, because you don't really understand how it actually works. So you're just trying to like type in words that you don't understand or know, and like hoping Google shows you the answer. So like it saves you so much time and keeps the flow of the recording session going. Oh man, there's kind of like just no end to the benefits of actually understanding what you're doing when you're recording.
So much. And also you don't, as you say, and you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't hear, because if nobody's there telling you what to actually listen for, and like it gets so difficult, because yes, you can find out how a compressor works and how an EQ works and how to route everything. You can eventually find that out. It takes longer, but you can. But even then, like, the real challenge is to make the sound that's in your head come out of the speakers. And if you don't know how to use all those tools and what to listen for and what is actually a good drum sound or a good guitar sound and what is not, and why is it not good or why does it not work, it's so hard. It's just like, yeah. And that I think that's the part where you can speed the whole process up a lot if you just have someone showing you what to listen for. If you not only learn how to use the tools, but why and when you use them, and how to make it that what you're hearing in your head actually happen. And like that's always been the biggest challenge for me. And I remember, like, every single record that I made, I always thought it's the greatest thing ever. And I always thought, now I'm at the point where I'm a professional engineer, only to find out a couple of months later that the record totally sucks, and that now I am finally getting decent results. And half a year later, I was like, man, that record sucked. And now I'm there. It's like never stops. And I mean, now I'm pretty confident, obviously, with what I'm doing. I still think... I still think and hope I'm improving and developing, because I always want to improve. But I'm like, for a couple of years now, I'm at least confident with what I'm putting out. But before that, I had this realization a lot of times that I thought, okay, now I'm there. I'm a pro now. Oh no, I'm not. And then like, just because your ears and your hearing has to develop, and you have to learn what's actually good and what's not. And it takes so much time if you have to do it on your own.
Yeah, and there's, like, if we're honest, it takes a lifetime to learn how to do that. There's always stuff to learn. It's entirely infinite. The game is always changing. New technology's coming out. But I think what our goal with your platform and this podcast is to, like, distill down what the core important things are, so that you guys can start off on the right foot. You don't have to learn it all to make a good record. You just have to know, like, the core basics, and there's a lot there still, but that's where people like us can come in and help and be like, okay, like, ignore that whole thing about I don't even know, like, Soothe is a great plugin, but you don't need to know anything about it to make a record. I wish that nobody knew the name. I wish I didn't even say it there. Don't Google Soothe. Stay away from that. That's not going to help you make a record at all.
No. Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole point. You basically summed it up so well now. Like, that's the whole point. Like, tell people, like, share the information that really matters, and avoid all the distraction, all the stuff that can be fun but doesn't, like, move the needle. And yeah, and I would definitely say that if you're a musician and not aspiring to be a professional mix engineer one day, you should just forget about the mixing part. You should totally try to mix your own, like, demos and rough mixes and whatever. You can always do that, but just do not aim to, like, get the same results as professional mixer XY, because you will never be able to do that, to be honest. Like, it takes such a long time. Even if people show you how to do it, you can learn mixing online and on your own. Of course you can, but as I said, it takes a whole lot of time. And if this is not your goal, I would focus on your songs, your music, your songwriting, the arrangement, and the recording stuff, and actually on making, like, magic happen and making great art and be inspired and creative and all of that. I would totally focus on that and leave the mixing to people who have done it for like 10 years and went through all of that. I'm not here to tell you can't mix. That's not the whole point, but I'm here to tell you that there's certain things that matter most, and that you as a musician can focus on those things, and that I would tackle those first, because if that foundation is not there, everything else is not gonna matter really. And I think if you're planning on doing something on your own, start with the recording, because that's possible. I know it's possible because I've done it a lot of time. Just get gear that you can afford and practice, take the advice that people give you, and then put it to action, and you will be able to make a decent record in a pretty short amount of time. And that's what I would totally focus on if I was a DIY musician, and I should have focused on that back then if my goal wouldn't have been to become a mix engineer. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
I fully agree. And the only thing I'd add to that is that more than any other part of like the audio side of recording, where there's the band side and then there's everything else, engineering is the only one that I think learning these skills will also benefit your songwriting. And your like how well you can play your instruments. Like if you guys haven't recorded yet, you are in for a rude awakening on your technique. You're just gonna hear it back and be like, I have to practice this, and this. And you don't get that from mixing. You don't get that from mastering. They're totally different skills. Where engineering directly is like looking in the mirror of your band essentially, and like having to look it in the face and realize what you're lacking and where things are falling short.
Absolutely. And the coolest realization for me was actually when I figured, actually there was a point when I started like finding out how stuff actually works, and when I started making good decisions during the recording process, my raw recordings and rough mixes all of a sudden sounded better than the mixes I did before. And that was because I didn't know what I did when I mixed back then. And I didn't pay as much attention to the details when I was recording, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But as soon as it made click, and I knew, I recorded like intentionally, and I paid attention to the arrangement and what the song needs, and I like as soon as that happened, like the raw recordings were already sounding much more like a record than my mixes were before that. And that's a cool realization, because you can get really far just with the recording, and that should always be the goal. That should be what you should aim for, like, because it actually your raw recordings should, when you hit play and find a rough balance with the faders, it should actually sound cool. It should sound great. It should not sound boring or like a demo or raw recording. It should sound like a song. And of course not the polished finished mix, but it should sound like a song. And if it doesn't, if the emotion doesn't come across, if the intention, the lyrics and everything, if it just doesn't work, then yeah, you can polish it with mixing and stuff, but maybe the recording is not there yet. You should at least feel the song the way you want it to feel it when you hit play and listen to your raw recordings, and that's a pretty cool challenge. So you don't even have to think about mixing. Try that challenge first. Try getting raw recordings that actually sound cool and sound like your song. And that can totally happen. And it's not about the technical stuff as much. It's not about the science. It's all science, of course, but it's not about, you don't have to know every single technical detail. You just have to be creative, and you have to know what your tools actually do and what they do if you put them in a different position, or you just have to know how to use what you have and be creative. And then you can do so much with that. And yeah, I would totally focus on that. And I would even add to what you said. Actually, I think every band should at some point try and record themselves now, because it's cheap. Like the gear is cheap. Like it's much easier than ever for somebody to get started with this. And if you don't record your own releases, just record demos and do pre-production or record your practices just to analyze how like you're playing your performance. You should totally do that, because you will get better as a musician by doing that. It's totally what Mark said. The first time you hear yourself recorded is totally different than what you hear when you are playing together live. And you should totally do that for that reason alone. Even if you're not planning on recording your releases, but just learning how to do basic recordings, how to record your demos and do pre-production is so worth it. And yeah, I would totally... There's no excuse not to, actually.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, you have to record yourself. That's like the first requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And just try it. And it starts even before learning how to play microphones. somewhere. If you just place one single mic in the middle of the room and play and listen to your performance, listen to how tight everything is, listen to the drums. Are you only hearing a huge cymbal mess, or are you actually hearing like the kick and snare and toms? Is it consistent? Is like stuff like that. It's not even about like that. It all begins there. Do the guitar tones like complement each other or whatever? Is like, even if you just do that, a pair of microphones somewhere in the room can like improve the way you play and the way you arrange your songs a lot. And you can always like go further down this rabbit hole from there if you started that way, you know. But yeah, you should definitely do at least basic recordings.
Absolutely. Is there anything else about your story, Benny, that you think they should know before we wrap this up?
I don't think so. I mean, I've talked a lot. But no, I don't. I actually don't think so. It's just the main takeaway for me is decide if you want to be a musician or if you want to be a mix engineer, and realize that if you want to learn mixing, it's going to take a lot of time. And realize if you want to learn the recording side of things, it's much more doable, but still requires you to take advice, study, educate yourself, put it to action, experiment, be patient, and eventually you get there. But like, don't do what I did and just sit in your practice room for years trying to figure it out on your own. Like today, this is not like the best thing, the best use of your time. I like get information, use free resources, buy a course or don't buy a course. I don't care. Just find whatever you think is helping you. Take that advice, be open for advice, even if it sounds weird to you. Just try it and see if it works. And decide if you what you wanna be. Are you a musician? Are you a mix engineer? What are you? And what are you trying to accomplish? You wanna make your band big and your next record a success, or is it actually an audio career that you're trying to do? Like that's the main takeaway from this, because I didn't know that for a long time, and I could have done it much faster.
And you don't have to decide, but I think to keep that question in mind as you learn, right? Because some of you are probably going to learn through Benny's courses and stuff like that, and then realize that they enjoy this more than playing. But the majority of you probably want to be in a band, and that's perfect. And even if you want to go further, specialized into like mixing or something, learning this stuff is where this all stems from. You kind of have to start at this level. This is like this is ground floor engineering 101, right? Everything else is higher up the building, and you just got to get this stuff down, and then you'll have a good idea of where you want to go from there. But the other thought I had is that as like for people that are kind of unsure about educating themselves about artistic stuff, just consider the fact that because there is so much education out there available now, like there wasn't when Benny and I were learning, the bands around you are going to be taking advantage of this. And we're going to see like a huge increase in the quality of what bands are doing on their own. And you want to be on that side. You want to be on the good side, right? Like you want your stuff to sound good and competitive and up to par. Because like, look, there's Billie Eilish is like going to set a record for awards this year, and her and her brother made that. They like produced and engineered that themselves, right? Like that is game changing. So you got to be on that level, and you're going to need all the help you can get.
Absolutely, yeah. And also, it's not only a matter of like we always talk about that it's cheap and affordable to do it on your own, but it's also a different way of working, because I don't think that Billie Eilish and her brother would have made as creative decisions and the record like that if they were under time pressure in a studio for like 2 or 3 or whatever weeks. But if you can do it in your environment the way you want it to do, if you're totally free because there are no rules, you can do whatever you want. And yes, you have a professional that gets the tracks and finishes it up and maybe gives you advice. That's always, as I said, that's always critical. But the whole creating, the process of creating something in your own environment, in your practice space, at your home, where you can like make the room look the way you want it to look, to feel inspired. You can work on your time, your hours. That enables a completely different way of working. And that's also a big advantage of doing it yourself versus paying for studio time. There would always be there would always be professional studios, and there would always be people who prefer to not do it their own and go to studios. So it's not one or the other. But if you're the type of person who likes to get creative and just dive into stuff without having to watch the clock, then that's so cool. Like, and I'm totally sure that the Billie Eilish, Billie Eilish, sorry, Billie Eilish, yeah, stuff I'm totally sure that it wouldn't sound the same and it wouldn't be the same songs if they wouldn't have done it on their own. So it's not only a budget thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like this, learning these skills is the only way, it's a cool thing. It's the only way you can write and record at the same time, which is the coolest process ever, because you have this instant feedback of being able to listen to what it sounds like recorded. And you like, unless you have a lot of money, a lot of money to go rent a studio and set up and write while you record in there, having your own setup and basic understanding of how to get a good product that way is really the only way I could think of that you could do that. So
Absolutely.
I think we're probably at this little point where music's going to start evolving a little differently because people are writing and recording simultaneously now, and instantly being able to hear it back in the same way that the listener will be able to.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. This is a good point actually, because it's much more connected to the real world and to what people actually listen to. And weirdly enough, the fact that I made those mistakes and that I did a couple of things wrong is actually the reason why I now feel confident about teaching people this stuff, because I've made all the mistakes and I don't want people to make those mistakes. Yeah, it is, because if I would have gone the usual route, or if I went to audio school and then only knew the professional studios and stuff like that, I'm not sure if I would understand a DIY musician as well. I mean, yeah. I spent years and years of trial and error in my practice room and in my little project studio, making mistakes, learning the hard way. So I really think I know what I'm talking about when I'm helping bands who are in the same spot. And I know what a crappy room sounds like. I know how to deal with cheap microphones. I know how to deal with cheap interfaces. I know like all that stuff. And it was a mistake if I only look at the release of my band back then. Mm-hmm. But it was the best thing I could have done to enable me like to do what I do now, and to make this platform happen, to be able to teach people this, and to be able to understand the bands that I'm mixing that record on their own. So yeah, that's just the explanation why I think that another audio podcast matters, and that we can teach you valuable stuff. That's just the reason. And that's also the reason why I wanted to bring Malcolm on, because here's a different story. But Malcolm has seen you've seen all kinds of different locations and situations as well. You know the big studios, you know the practice room, I know film
the
sound.
bomb cellar in China.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly why I think this is great. And yeah, I made the mistakes. You should not make them. So we can distill it down, like we said, to like the core elements that really matter, and go from there. Awesome.
Great. Well, I guess next week we are kicking off on like the first piece of real content. If you listen to everything up to here, you know who we are and why we're doing this, and what we're going to be talking about more or less. But it's coming up next. We're actually going to be talking about actionable information for you guys to use.
Absolutely. It's going to be much more specific. It's going to be specific topics that we will help you with. And I really hope you stick with us, because I think that the self-recording band is the future. And I don't mean the platform. I mean you as a self-recording band is the future of the music industry. It will happen more and more often. We will see great successes. And I want you to be a part of that. And I want to guide you and help you with that. There are not a lot of things that I find more exciting than people creating stuff on their own without rules somewhere, and then like something crazy cool happens with that. Like that's always fascinated me. And yeah, so stick with us. This is going to be a great journey, and it's only starting. So yeah.
All right, let's sign off.
So this was episode 3 of the Self-Recording Band podcast. Thank you for sticking till the end. Thank you for listening to those long-ass introduction episodes. We promised you that it's going to be much more actionable, much more to the point, much more specific in from now on in all the future episodes. And the first actionable thing that I have for you is, if you haven't yet, go to theselfrecordingband.com and download the 10-step guide to successful DIY recording. It's a completely free PDF guide that I put together that you can download there. There is also a free essential gear guide, as well as a free mic placement cheat sheet, all on that website. And go there, download that, and you're off to a great start. Next episode is going to be out next week, Wednesday, and it's going to be about drums. All right, keep making exciting records. See ya. Bye.